good things about living in Gateshead are the fact that it's not Newcastle and it really gets up their nose.
The cosmopolitan atmosphere.
The Metro Centre, good shopping.
The Baltic, the Sage, the Millennium Bridge and the Angel of the North.
Good things about living in Gateshead. There's not many southerners up here. If Gateshead was a three-course meal, it would be chips, chips and chips.
Beans, beans and more beans. Gruel, tripe and stoddies.
Mark Steele's in town.
Thanks very much. Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Mark Steele's in Town, which this week comes from the Town Hall in Gateshead. On the enthusiastic Gateshead on the banks of the River Tyne, right opposite its smaller cousin, the sleepy suburb of Newcastle. In fact, Gateshead's official motto, I noticed, written on the shield above the town hall door is, "We're not Newcastle, we're Gateshead!" We've got an Angel of the North, they haven't. Which is probably just as well, because if they had one in Newcastle, they'd all be stood underneath it with their shirts off all day, going, "Come on then, you didn't frighten me! You 100-ton rusty puff with your wings like biplanes, I'll take you." The Angel of the North is obviously part of Gateshead, a very important part of this side of the river. I'll come on to that later. But I'm not so sure, I have to say, about your other prominent statue here, the Sports Day thing by the Metro station, which I think it's fair to say is the ugliest statue in the world and seems to commemorate the achievements of sportsmen by depicting an athlete with a Mohican mounting a tortoise. Or, might be being unfair, it might be a traditional custom round here. Every time Gateshead win a match in the Blue Square Premier League across the town, there's tortoises going, "Oh no. Oh, just find some lettuce, put it out your mind, block it out, here we go." Also, there's a magnificent underground system that sort of covers most of Gateshead, and I really like it because it's a proper industrial underground system. It's sort of clanky and loud and like an underground railway should be. And I love that you don't call it the Underground, like it's nothing to do with London. You call it the Metro, like you're at one with Paris. And I bet you go, "That's not the High Street, that's the Champs de Bloody-Élysées, that." You are, of course, still Geordies, in a sense, in Gateshead. You're now in the middle, in Gateshead as well, of this 50 squillion pound, whatever it is, regeneration scheme of things that are being transformed right by the riverside. There's even a Gateshead Hilton, which at first I thought was a euphemism for the accident and emergency. I wonder if Mr. Hilton named his least favourite daughter Gateshead. There's the Sage Concert Hall, of course, big sort of bubbly snail-looking peculiar thing there. And there's the Baltic Art Gallery, part of this regeneration scheme. Now, I've been round there twice now. And the first time I drifted off a bit, to be honest. It's not really my thing. But I did notice as I was walking past that there was a chemist in the art gallery. And I thought, oh, there's a chemist in the art gallery. You wouldn't expect that, I suppose, for emergencies. I don't know. And then I walked past and I thought, oh, hang on, that's not a work of art, is it? And then, sure enough, there was a sign up saying, "This is Damien Hirst's famous installation called The Pharmacy." The bloke I was with, I said to him, "Hey, do you reckon if you moved some of these tablets just along a few inches that Damien Hirst had come in and go, 'Now you've ruined it'?" And as I did it, I just sort of touched this glass cabinet. And honestly, this bloke, security guard man, he came running right across the room, right into me face. He went, "Don't you touch that! This is a work of art worth £10 million! And I said, "Well, it's not now, is it? I've spoilt it. It's only worth £9 million. And he went even closer, right at me nose. He went, "Oh, you think you're very funny, you, don't you?" And I thought, this place is class. Even the pretentious art snobs are hard. This is fantastic. You go into an art gallery around here, say the wrong thing. Are you having a go at Botticelli's perspective? Come here and share that. While his girlfriend goes, leave it, Darren, it's not worth it. It's from his later Orange period. I'm much more impressed, I have to say, by the campaign to save the Get Carter car park. This is the car park still there, despite the fact that everything around it has been demolished. That is no longer any use as a car park because you can't get to or from it. And it's there because it was the car park in the famous murder scene in Get Carter, which was chosen for the film because it was suitably horribly grim. And it's due to be demolished, but the Get Carter Appreciation Society say it should be preserved as a famous building, which is fantastic because it is famous. It's famous for being horrible. You can't knock that down. It's the ugliest building in the world, man. It's fantastic. How brilliant when you compare this to other preservation campaigns that you get. You know, someone comes on BBC Two and I believe that it is vital that Lansbury House is preserved as an example of classic Georgian architecture with its unique period rounded gables. Compare that to, you cannot demolish. That is where Alf Roberts was tipped off the roof. Today I saw some graffiti that said, "Let us never forget, an icon for millions around the world." And I swear, if you didn't know, you would think, is this about some sort of Central American leader that has been... that was shot dead by some paramilitary forces backed by the American government or something, and there was going to be some sort of speech later on of people going, remember, this is a terrible injustice and inequality that has been dished out to our people, and whatever happened, we will remember for many, many generations that we must revenge the terrible injustice of the car park being demolished where Alf Roberts... The other building that's about to be demolished, or that has been due to be demolished for some time in Gateshead, is the Dunstan Rocket. This is a block of flats on the estate in Dunstan, a part of Gateshead, and a block of flats that's shaped like a rocket, which would have made a wonderful, quirky place to live, but for the fact that it was unbloody habitable. Luckily, though, Dunstan has another boast. It is the estate where Paul Gascoigne was brought up. He was born in the Elizabeth Hospital, brought up in Pitt Street, first played football in Edison Gardens and then in Saltwell Park. And in his book, he describes lots of the sweet little cheruby antics that he got up to in the area with his mate Jimmy Five Bellies. For example, I'll quote this from his book. "We got hold of an air gun and Jimmy stood 20 yards away with his pants down and I fired at his bare arse. For each of the pellets I hit him with, I had to pay him £25. His arse ended up looking like the end of a watering can." That is literature. The spirit of Gateshead, I think, comes through on the marvellous website called Gateshead Then Till Now, which starts by saying at a latitude of 55 degrees north, you might think it would be cold, but with global warming now it isn't. So that's all worked out for the best, isn't it? I said I didn't think you felt the cold up here anyway. That's why you never see a Geordie weatherman. They'd just be stood there in February on the telly with their shirt off going, there's an icy front coming in from Siberia, but I don't feel it, me. Something else in your favour is you're clearly not willing to sacrifice the local spirit just to suck up to the posh layers of society. For example, in 1831, the town applied to be represented by its own Member of Parliament, but the Marquis of Londonderry refused this, saying, "Gateshead is a mere suburb, a long, dirty lane leading to Newcastle. It is a most filthy spot containing the vilest class of society." And on the Gateshead Then Till Now website, after that quote, it says, "He wants his ears boxed." Even the local history website's hard. Local historians sit round at their meetings, go, "Have you seen what Samuel Pepys wrote about us? Let's go and get him." I think it's quite sweet in some ways, though, that at least there was a time when the upper class said what they actually thought, rather than now when they think exactly the same but then have to apologise for every time they've said it, you know. So, you know, Boris Johnson will be up here one day going, yes, well, I'm deeply sorry if I did offend the people of Gateshead when I said that if you've seen the women up here, you can understand why they do that to the tortoise. It really wasn't meant. It was just an off-the-cuff remark, and I was no offence meant. No one seems to have impressed J.B. Priestley. He wrote in 1934, "No true civilization could have produced such a town, which is nothing better than a dingy dormitory. Whoever designed Gateshead was a true enemy of the human race." Now, strangely, there is no record of J.B. Priestley ever having done a book signing in the Metro Shopping Centre, Waterstones. Also, I didn't realise this, it's Gateshead and not Newcastle where the Blaydon races were. This is the Geordie anthem written by a man called George Ridley, an unemployed labourer in the 1860s, and the verse that's known is a jolly song about the community all off to see the races. And its famous last line, which I'm sure you can all sing if I count to three, goes 1, 2, 3... The very last line. Going down the Scots. Thank you very much, David. Magnificent rendition. So now this is a great song then to counter the image of the place being just sort of rough. This is a marvellous, jolly community sing-along song. The third verse is even jollier about a family day out because a wheel comes off the bus. And then it goes, when we get the wheel put on, away we went again. But them that got their noses broke, they come back o'er home. Some went to the dispensary and others to Dr. Gibbs, and some sought out the infirmary to mend their broken ribs. But I think to make it even more realistic, the song actually should have ended. The doctor said, I'll feel your ribs and check your pulse and heart. But this is not the infirmary, it's just a work of art. Even better, the last year that the Blaydon races actually took place was 1916. There was a riot following the disqualification of a horse. So up here, when people talk about the pointless violence of 1916, this is the only place where people think, hey, if they'd not disqualified that horse, it wouldn't have happened. I bet the lads from here that went to the Somme went, oh, it's nice to get a bit of peace and quiet. When I started reading about Gateshead, I thought, right, now, to start off with, don't just go along the lines of the old stereotypes of them all like in fighting. There's a lot more to it than that. And so I started reading this book, first book I read about Gateshead, and it's called Around Gateshead. And the second sentence goes... There was a church close to this site many centuries ago, but in 1080 it was burnt down by locals with the Bishop of Durham inside. But mostly the history of Gateshead seems to be centred around this insistence that you're not Newcastle. Even in 1552 there was an Act of Parliament passed that annexed Gateshead to Newcastle. So this is vicious stuff. You were annexed. I bet at the time in Afghanistan people were going, see what happened now in Gateshead, why can't they just sit down because... A book called The County of Durham described this whole business from the Gateshead point of view. It says, the feud grew to a frenzy when the wicked Newcastleites got an act passed to amalgamate the two towns. And then it says, Gateshead rose as one and declared, the town of Gateshead is good and wholesome. It is known that the south side of the river is deep and more clean than the side towards Newcastle. How can a river be more clean? Even the river, like the river's going, oh, I'm all nice and flowing down the Gateshead side. There's probably another bit that goes, the martyrs of Gateshead shall rise forth from the Metro shopping centre and float across the Tyne in mighty vengeance against the infidel Newcastleites. And then call everyone to prayer. Why, In some ways, the Tyne is very much like the Thames in London, obviously, in that it was just so busy 150 years ago. When you look at the pictures, it just makes it look as if the river was where all the life was and the land was the tranquil part, if you like. The bridges are just so magnificent because they're all higgledy-piggledy and wrong, big and small and different colours, and they've not been planned. So I think I love that. Even the bridges have become centres of dispute about where on the bridge the border is. And this issue isn't over. Even now the Gateshead website, where it mentions the Millennium Bridge, says the bridge is 100% Gateshead. You take this seriously, the border, don't you? I bet when the Berlin Wall come down, some of you rang the Stasi and said, don't chuck that wall away, we'll have it over here. But there's a reason. The reason why Newcastle was so keen to grab Gateshead, which was that this is the first area in the country where coal was worth a fortune. The coal was near the surface, it was next to the river, so the first mining rights were granted in 1344 when tunnels were driven into the bank and the shafts were sunk. And I just find this amazing. There was coal mining going. It just seems wrong, like if you said, by 1450 we had digital radio around here. None of that analogue rubbish. When Walter Raleigh brought back the potato, we said, well, you can take that to South Shields, we've got Doritos already. And you can take your tobacco away, man, like we're Geordies, we had tubs when we were amphibians. The last pits shut here in 1983, and I did go to one, Marley Hill, there, an ex-pit up the road. And on the way to the pit village, I came across the Tanfield Railway that somebody showed me, and I was told that that was the earliest known railway in the world that's still running in some capacity. It goes back to the 1620s. And I thought, no, don't tell me that as well. The 1620s? How many more things like this have you got? 1683, Shortwell Park. That's the first time anybody used Windows 7. This is... The claim is that the Tanfield Railway took coal down to Dunstan, that the Causey Arch on that railway line is the oldest bridge for a railway in the world. And I went to the engine shed, and every day it was like there's somebody there just covered in oil mending some old steam engine. And then on Sundays they all get dressed up in their uniforms and they blow whistles, and hundreds of kids all sort of chug up and down on these trains. And there's just no way you could see any of this and not think these people are just so brilliantly full of enthusiasm for getting trains running. Why don't we put them in charge of the National Rail Service? It's just obvious. But the biggest Gateshead hero of the 1800s, and this is an amazing story, I think, was someone called Harry Clasper. Harry Clasper had worked in the pits, he'd been a ship's carpenter, and he then became so famous that when he died, 130,000 people came to his funeral. So I'm just interested to know, do people here know what he did? He was a rower, clearly you all know about this. In the 1840s, rowing events up the Tyne regularly drew crowds of between 50,000 and 100,000. And Harry won the Thames Regatta 7 times. He was World Coxed 4 champion, which he won in a boat with his 3 brothers. Now, at this point, anyone not from Gateshead listening to this must be like I was when I first heard this and think, rowing? Gateshead? 100,000? Are you winding me up? At first I wondered if I'd misread it and he was rowing champion. Because you think of rowing as Oxford and Cambridge and rowing lakes at Eton and Henley Regatta, and you don't think of the Henley Regatta as something that 100,000 rowdy people would turn up to, and they certainly wouldn't sing the Blaydon races, would they? Unless they had a version that went, "Hooray, the lads, you should have seen us punting. Sipping Pims and finding ways to beat the ban on hunting. All the lads and lasses you can see there a disturbance, walking down the private drive to sack 2 of the servants." Harry Clasper redesigned the boat so that the hull wasn't in contact with the water as much. And this was an enormous innovation in the history of boat making. And he also completely changed the way that rowers rowed, because he was the first person to pioneer the idea that you should sort of slide backwards and forwards to use your legs as part of the act of rowing. So he was this extraordinary character. If rowing's going to become popular again, then it needs these sorts of innovations, like fitting some of the boats with weapons. I'd watch that, the boat race. I'd watch it then if it was between Oxford, Cambridge and a Geordie on a pedalo with a torpedo. All through the 19th century, there are just these amazing things going on up here. Apparently the first house ever to be lit with electricity was in Mosley Street. And this was as a result of a Gateshead inventor called Joseph Swan. And amazingly, there was another first next door to him. The first people ever to bypass the meter and nick the electric off their neighbours. And he was... Swan even patented the light bulb, apparently, a year before Thomas Edison. And other fun that happened here throughout this time, because Durham and Northumberland were the two regions throughout all of this period that were consistently top of the National Drunkenness League. So to try and curb this trend, a series of temperance halls were set up in 1846, but eventually they reported, throughout the region, only 73 adults have registered as teetotalers and 49 juveniles. The Gateshead Then Till Now site says, it's often claimed that there are so many pubs in the high street it's not possible to do a pub crawl having a half in every one. But then it says, however, at its peak there were 32 pubs. Well, excuse me, but that's only 16 pints. I went up the high street last night for a drink, and I settled upon the delights of the Metropole. And it was one of the most exciting, wonderful nights I have ever had in my life. There were 4 other people in there, none of which had any teeth. And there was a bloke who at some point in his life must have heard a funny joke, because he kept shouting the punchline, going, "They thought he meant the budgie!" Over and over and over again, expecting people to laugh again and again. And one of these blokes came over to me, and he stood right over me, and he went, "I drink Scottish and Newcastle, me, but I don't only drink that leak. I normally swap to another ale leak, and then I have another ale, and then I go back to Scottish and Newcastle. And then I have another leak, different ale, might be the same as the different ale I had earlier, it might be the same or different, and then I go back to Scottish and Newcastle, and I alternate like that leak, and that way I don't get bored." Something else that might surprise people is that since Victorian times, Gateshead has had a fair-sized Jewish community. That's several hundred Jewish families here now. But its importance is apparently much bigger than you'd guess. The book about the local community says, Gateshead has been described as a powerhouse of Judaism and the Jerusalem of England. I don't mean to be rude, but I think he was overselling the place. Imagine setting up a religious cult and promising you'll lead them to Jerusalem and then bringing them to Gateshead. Here you are, I told you, not only an angel but a brutal car park, it's paradise. Also, I can't help thinking that a Jewish Geordie must be one that goes out in February saying, "I'm not wearing me skull cap, I don't feel the cold, me." But then the story gets just magnificently Gateshead, because the founder of the community set up his own synagogue. But the chief rabbi of Britain told him the worst thing that you could say to anyone from Gateshead. He said, "You're not important enough to be independent, you've got to be part of the Newcastle synagogue." And the chief rabbi refused to allow the Gateshead group to have their own Sefer Torah, which is a scroll that is needed to conduct an official service. And so they bought a secret one and kept it in a drawer, hidden from everyone. So Gateshead should be immensely proud of that. That the Jewish community would rather enrage the chief rabbi, break their own religious rules and risk making God furious than be part of Newcastle. But most of all, you've got an angel. The Angel of the North, a splendid specimen, a vast statue by the A1, designed by artist Anthony Gormley. I don't know, there's something about it. As a complete artistic ignoramus that I am, I think there's something just very exciting and brilliant about the Angel. And when you go up there, it's sort of especially so, because it's just built on a sort of craggy, muddy field on the edge of a council estate, and it's clunky and rusty, and it's approachable, like a Geordie angel. It's like it's saying, excuse me, but 16 paints would hardly wet the tips of my wings. And it weighs 200 tonnes, and when it was put up in 1997, it came from Hartlepool on 3 trucks, and 20-metre concrete piles had to be sunk into the ground as a precaution against subsidence. Which, you've got to think, well, it's just as well they did that. You wouldn't want that subsiding, would you? Imagine that sliding down the road towards Low Fell. Be like a science fiction film, wouldn't it? With a general called in going, my guess is he wants a fight with the Dunstan rocket. I'm just going to quote the Daily Mail at the time. There's a chap called John Casey who said, it is sure to cause a fatal accident, in which case no doubt its name will be changed to the Angel of Death. So what's the general feeling now? Is people like it? Yes. So I should just finish the show tonight, Gateshead, by saying that I think in a lot of ways the Angel sums up the spirit of Gateshead. If something's going to win people over around here, it clearly isn't going to do it by being pretentious. I think my favourite ever barman I ever came across was from Gateshead. But I went to this little hotel that I was put in by mistake. It was only a small little place, and it had champagne bar up there, which was a little bit above its station, really. And we were in there, and it was a bit of a special occasion, and we said, we'll get a bottle of champagne. And this barman looked at us, and he went, all right, champagne, right? And he turned round, and he got this dusty old menu from a top shelf, and he looked at it, and he just opened it up, and he went, are you sure, Lake? Have you seen the prices?
Mark Steele's In Town was written and performed by Mark Steele with additional material by Pete Sinclair. The producer was Julia Mackenzie.